Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Brad Sever. Brad is a former social studies teacher and instructional coach, as well as he's worn several other hats. But he's currently an assistant principal who is the author of an awesome practical book called Sustainable Project-Based Learning: 5 Steps for Designing Authentic Classroom Experiences in Grades 5 through 12. And he's also the founder of Perseverance Education. Oh my gosh, so much to learn. What a great conversation. You're going to love this. But by the way, before you go, have you been to my website lately? It'd be so cool if you went there. I have a free audio class on some classroom management tips, as well as all my podcasts are there. And you also can find other information as well as my blog. So good stuff. I'd love for you to go there. And by the way, you could also rate and review the podcast. Could you do that for me? Because that's how we get found in podcast land. Thanks so much. You are awesome. Enjoy the show.
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Milletto. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12. With Dr. Steve Milletto.
Brad Sever is an assistant principal at Carmel High School in Indiana. There he has helped to create and sustain a successful instructional coaching program and grow the school's International Baccalaureate Diploma program. Brad is a national presenter. He speaks on PBL, instructional coaching, and leadership. He has worked with more than 100 schools around the United States and Australia, providing professional development for charter, urban, rural, and suburban schools. He is also the author of the book Sustainable Project-Based Learning, published by Solution Tree. Brad, is so cool to have you here today. Glad to have you on the show. Say hi to everyone.
Hey, Steve. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's such a privilege, and I look forward to our conversation.
Cool. So I do too. And just a note, I want to make sure that, we're going to talk about your book, which is Sustainable Project-Based Learning: 5 Steps for Designing Authentic Classroom Experiences in Grades 5 through 12. We're going to do that in just a little bit. But before we do that, let's start with something I read about you. I understand that you were a 7th and 8th grade social studies teacher at one time. What'd you like best about teaching kids?
I just love working with kids, first and foremost. I mean, what I like best, just getting to know them. Getting to know their interests, what they like to do. I also had the opportunity to coach football and basketball and track. So I like to get to know them both inside the classroom and outside the classroom. Like to know what they're interested in, and of course, ways to make the content engaging to them and in a way that they can personally connect with it.
Very cool. Very cool. So you've been a teacher. One of the things I also want to point out is that right now you're an assistant principal in a school, and you've been an instructional coach, and you've been a lot of different things. So, my audience will, I've got a little bit of all of you out here in in my audience world. So that's good stuff. And, let's talk about that instructional coach thing. At one time you did this, and you were an instructional coach. What was something you learned about working with colleagues that you kind of always want to remember?
I had the opportunity to be trained in cognitive coaching. It's through the adaptive schools training. And I guess in that training and in cognitive coaching, it's about not having the right answer, but asking the right question. And that's something that I try and keep in mind each and every day as a leader and as a colleague in a school. I think sometimes, maybe we're quick to jump to try and have the right answer, but I think it's much more empowering if you can ask the right question.
Very cool. Well, we're almost there to start talking about your book, but I got to tell you, just that, what you're talking about right now, your book is easy to read, understand, and put to use. And I would think that, just a note, I could see where some of what you're talking about learning and working with people is coming through here. So good stuff. So before we get any further, we're going to talk about project-based learning. So what do you mean when you use that term, project-based learning? And, and the title of your book is Sustainable Project-Based Learning. So what does that mean as well?
Well, Steve, that's a great question, because project-based learning is a bit of a buzzword in that there's a lot of different definitions of it that are floating around. I've had the privilege of being a member of the national faculty for PBL Works, formerly the Buck Institute for Education. And so when we talk about defining project-based learning, I use their definition of project-based learning in that it is a way to design and implement a unit of study that intentionally incorporates 7 design elements, which include reflection, student voice and choice, sustained inquiry, having a driving question or challenge, providing opportunities for critique and revision, having authenticity in the unit of study, and giving students an opportunity to present a public product at the end of the unit of study. So when we define project-based learning, that is the definition I'm going off of, really the intentional design and implementation of a unit of study and that incorporates those 7 design elements.
Very cool. So Brad, in front of project-based learning, I appreciate you explaining that, you also have the word sustainable. That's on the front cover of your book. What's that mean? What's that add to it when you say sustainable project-based learning?
Yeah, so if you could just envision a Venn diagram with 3 circles, one of the circles would be content acquisition through project-based learning as defined in the way that I just defined it. The second circle being graduation skills or employability skills through social and emotional learning. And then the third circle being teacher collaboration time through teacher action research. Sustainable project-based learning, if you imagine that Venn diagram, is the intersection of those 3 things. It's the intentional incorporation of social and emotional learning or employability skills within the context of the unit of study. It's not a set-aside initiative. It is teacher action research or, PLC teams and teacher collaboration time, doing actual teacher action research within the context of the project-based learning unit. So looking at formative assessments throughout the implementation of the project-based learning unit, teachers getting into one another's classrooms during the implementation of the project-based learning unit. So sustainable project-based learning is not just project-based learning, but it's the integration of teacher collaboration time, doing teacher action research, and social and emotional learning, focusing on those SEL or employability skills.
Very cool. I appreciate you explaining that. So I think this is so cool. I mean, you have a book. Not only is it a book, but it's also published through Solution Tree. It's what we're talking about today. It's called Sustainable Project-Based Learning, 5 Steps for Designing Authentic Classroom Experiences in Grades 5 through 12. So what made you say, I want to write this book? Because a lot of people want to write a book, but it just never gets there.
Yeah, so for about 10 years, I had the opportunity to be a consultant and work with a lot of schools around the country. And I was a consultant specifically on project-based learning. And I would go into schools and I would do a workshop on how to plan and design a project-based learning unit. And almost to a T, throughout that time, I would be asked at least one of the following 3 questions. Question number 1 would be, hey, this is great. We're excited to do project-based learning, but how do you really sustain it? Will people still be excited in implementing a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now? That would be question number 1. How do we really sustain this work? Question number 2 would be, hey, we have teacher collaboration time. How do we enhance the conversation around deeper learning during teacher collaboration time? And then question number 3 would be, hey, we have a social and emotional learning initiative at our high school or our middle school or our elementary school. How do we integrate social and emotional learning into the curriculum so that it's not a set-aside initiative? Like, doing strategies which are really helpful, brain-based strategies like mindful minutes and some of these activities that are SEL activities. But, how do we make it so that it's really authentic and woven into the curriculum? So I would be asked either all 3 of those questions or one of those 3 questions. And my book really is meant to answer those 3 questions. That we look at these 3 things, teacher collaboration time, social emotional learning, and project-based learning, completely integrated and not as 3 siloed initiatives. So, and even more specific, I think schools that have teacher collaboration time or professional learning communities, man, I really think they benefit from using a framework like project-based learning. So it's not just about the quantitative standardized testing data, although that data is important, but it's also about the qualitative data and looking at evidence of authentic learning experiences for students. And formative assessments within the context of a project-based learning unit. So I think that professional learning communities benefit from project-based learning, and simultaneously, project-based learning absolutely benefits from having good structured professional learning communities or teacher collaboration time. Because really, it's not just about planning and designing a unit. It's about the conversations that we have around the evidence of learning during the implementation of the unit, and after the implementation of the unit. And I really think that it's those conversations, that's how you sustain the work.
That is awesome. And I love it. I appreciate you sharing that, because there's a lot to it. And your book, this is really going to be a great segue, because your book does an awesome job of it. First of all, it's very readable. It's not something where you got to be looking, can someone help me define these words, because I sure don't know what it means, or something like that. And instead, it's very easy to read, and it's full of practical stuff to use, for lack of a better term. It's literally, it's got all this cool stuff to be able to read and start working on putting it into action. And I really love stuff like that as a former principal and former teacher and all that. And you really like it when you understand what the person's talking about and have the opportunity then to take it and some ways of putting it to work. So one of the things that's really cool about your book is that you've included checklists, how to create tasks, help in how to do this, or basically you have help in explaining how to do what you're talking about. Could you talk about writing to include this type of information? I mean, first of all, like, what made you do that? And, what's it like, including that stuff? I mean, what were you thinking about as you're doing that?
Well, first of all, thank you for those kind words about the book. I really wanted the book to be extremely practical, and I wanted to provide the reader with a lot of templates, and to break things down step by step. Everything from step one of planning and designing the unit with a template, and I have to give a shout out to my good friend and fellow author and educator, Dr. Michael McDowell. Some of his work was a really strong inspiration for me. He wrote a great book several years ago called Rigorous Project-Based Learning, and which was very influential. So I wanted the reader to be able to go through the planning process as well as the implementation process with some clear consumables and templates to really help guide them, throughout. So, if they wanted to do a book study as like a small group or a grade level or a specific content area group, or maybe a school-wide book study, that there were clear steps and very clear, like you said, checklists and templates to help guide people through each of the steps.
Oh, I love it. There's nothing better than, this is not like one thing. All right. This is not like two things. This is a lot of cool stuff. And so, you're actually, it's like getting a presents all wrapped up inside of this topic of the book. So kudos to you for doing that. One of my favorite chapters is chapter 7, and it's titled Step 3, Establishing a Clear Goal for Student Learning. Now, for my listeners, I'm not going to go through each chapter of the book. So you need to go buy his book, all right? Because it's going to be helpful to you. But I am going to highlight a couple of chapters. And the first one I'm going to highlight is chapter 7, which is it's called Step 3, Establishing a Clear Goal for Student Learning. And Brad, you say this: once you have planned your SPBL unit and your assessments, it is time to craft a goal for student learning. Could you talk about this, about creating these goals?
Sure, Steve. And just as I talked in the previous question about how Dr. Michael McDowell was an influence, in chapter 7, definitely Rick DeFore and his work was an influence in terms of the work that he has done with professional learning communities and that model of professional learning communities. And we know one of the techniques used is to develop a SMART goal. and have teams of teachers really think about what their goals for student learning are. And so I think that's really important when we talk about this idea of PLCs and doing teacher action research. When we design a unit of study, we want to establish clear goals around student learning so that we can have conversations with each other. Hey, are we meeting our goals around student learning? And I think it's important to have goals that are like quantitative, so like standardized testing, based on growth measures involving some forms of standardized testing, but also more qualitative, where it's like telling the story of the learning and what are the project milestones and benchmarks throughout the unit. What are those formative assessments as students are working on an authentic product and working through authentic tasks? We should be talking about those as well, and to have a clear goal. I'm a big fan of doing pre-assessments and post-assessments, and the focus being on student growth. And I think if we can focus on individual student growth, then our overall student achievement is going to increase, right? But instead of kind of always just focusing on these broad student achievement goals, let's really break it down for each unit of study and focus on individual student growth within each of these units of study and have ongoing conversations and look at both quantitative, example, standardized testing data, and qualitative, example, like project milestone.
That is awesome. And, it's so important because a lot of times I think what happens is we start thinking about, in education, the joke has always been that if the principal goes off to a conference, what's he or she going to bring back, that we're going to have to do for the next thing or something like this. And, one of the things that we're looking at is that the idea here is that if you're going to do PBL is that you got to create goals and understand what you're trying to do. And I think this chapter gets into that very well. So I like that.
Thank you.
One of the next chapters that I wanted to point out is chapter 9 is called Step 5, Reflecting, Refining, and Celebrating. And one of the things I think is so important about this chapter is that I think it's oftentimes we leave all of this stuff out. All right. And why is it important to reflect, refine, and celebrate?
Well, I think reflection is learning. And in the book, I talk about the 3 levels of learning, and that a really good project-based learning unit should have equal intensity of surface level learning, so basic knowledge, key terms, key vocabulary, deep level learning, compare and contrast, cause and effect, and then transfer learning, application in a new and different context, ideally a real world context. And in the book, I talk about that, how those 3 levels of learning have to be implemented for a really good, strong project-based learning unit. And when we think about reflecting, that's an opportunity for students to really demonstrate some transfer. When they can reflect on their own learning, I think that's very, very powerful. When they're able to identify where they've been in their learning, where they are in their learning, and where they're going in their learning, I think that is a very research-based approach. Dr. John Hattie's research talks about those students that can do that are assessment capable. And that has a very high effect size based on his research. So I think reflection and reflecting on learning is extremely important and extremely powerful. In terms of refining, I think as teachers, ideally, people are going through this process. Teachers are going through this process, maybe with some other teachers. Refining is important. Hey, when we just implemented this unit of study, what went well? What are we going to tweak and adjust next time? Let's go through and use some of these checklists in the book. What do we want to refine when we implement this for next year? Or what do we want to refine before we implement our next unit? And then celebration. I think celebration is so important to do with students. In a project-based learning unit, hey, we just answered an overarching driving question that has more than one right answer, that addresses a real-world problem or challenge. This is a rigorous process that we went through. Ideally, the answer to our driving question benefited somebody outside of the classroom. And we need to celebrate that. I mean, that's what we do as adults, Steve, right? When we accomplish something that was very difficult and challenging, we take time out to celebrate and acknowledge and affirm. And I just think that's so important. So those three things, reflecting, refining, and celebrating, I think are important to do as adults. And I think they're also very important to do with our students.
Excellent. Excellent. I love it. It's just a note. I got to tell the audience, I mean, you're in a school that has like somewhere around 5,000 kids. Now, wow. All right. So, that's amazing. And I can only imagine that in a school that size that you could get lost in the crowd or even maybe somebody, not really doing with, I don't know, not understanding, where you're going with things and stuff like this. So I can only imagine that how important refining, doing this process of, reflecting and refining is so important, because that kind of brings them together to say, hey, this is important, and we don't need to just do our own thing, I guess. So I guess that's the point. And whether you do it at your school or not is not my point. But I was just thinking, man, the size of your school, it's a prime example of how important those processes are. I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, I guess, first of all, I'm very fortunate to work in the school I work in. I absolutely love Carmel High School. Just amazing opportunity, amazing students, amazing community, amazing teachers. And certainly it's not a perfect school, but it's a great school. And, we certainly implement elements of this. We actually I've just been recently having some conversations about this idea of surface deep and transfer that I just mentioned. We do have a PLC team structure and opportunities for teacher collaboration. Actually, there are a few teachers that are featured from Carmel High School in the book, and sample units that they designed are actually in the back of the book in the appendix. So yeah, I absolutely love my school, and I just love this community.
That's so cool. So and all the power to you, man. That's awesome. I thought I'd been in a big school when biggest I was at was 2,400, and as a high school principal, all my schools were right around 2,000. And I take that back. The first one was smaller, 1,200. But next to 5,000, 1,200 would be like, ooh, little tiny. But good stuff. Well, that's so cool. Thanks for sharing that. And one of the things that you just started talking about that I've got to make sure I mention is in the appendix, you have this amazing amount of reproducibles. Now, I think that's cool on different levels, because not only are you showing them examples of how to do what you're talking about, you've also given them permission that they can reproduce it, right? So,
yeah.
So can you talk about that section? I mean, it shows that you're writing to help. I mean, let's just talk about that.
Well, I would say first off, just Solution Tree, just a great publisher to work with, and the reproducibles are not only in the book, but if you go to the Solution Tree website and you click through that, you type in sustainable project-based learning, folks can actually download so many of the documents from the book. So all those reproducibles you can download as a PDF. So it's absolutely meant to be, again, a tool and a resource that teachers can use these templates and these reproducibles. I guess I would encourage everybody kind of has their own way that they like to kind of customize things. Feel free to do that. It's the book is meant to be just a very practical resource for teachers when they go to design and implement a unit of study and conduct action research around that unit. Yeah.
Well, that's so awesome, because you've done just that. And by having all that stuff there, I mean, any teacher who's looking to, they can't, there's no way you could read your book and say, I don't know what to do, because you got all kinds of examples how to get started, stuff that you can reproduce and so forth. So awesome stuff. I think
just one more thing, Steve, sorry to interrupt, but I try to be very intentional about providing a lot of examples in the book, just because I think when you show examples, it really adds clarity to the work. So the appendix that you're specifically mentioning, are examples of completed templates and completed units from all different grade levels, all different subject areas. I just think by providing examples, that adds clarity to the work. So those are also in the reproducibles section and available on the Solution Tree website as well.
Yeah, and that's awesome, because that's one of those things that that's always the trouble with, if you are hearing about something or reading about something, is understanding what it looks like, or how to use it, or how to really make some activities that you might be thinking, well, that's fine. I'm not the author. I'm not the person that the author was interviewing or something like this. How do I get? Well, you've solved that problem right there, because you've got materials for them to reproduce and to use, and it shows what they can do in their classroom, how to get started and keep going, I guess is my point. So love it. One of the things that is really is also awesome is that you've got a lot of things going on in your world, and you also are the founder of Perseverance Education, and you have this really cool website and some stuff that you do and work with schools. And in the beginning of it, your mission statement says, "Our mission is to ensure every student is provided with meaningful and valuable learning experiences that equip them with content, knowledge, and skills so that they can solve the problems that will exist in their future." Could you talk about how you do this?
Yeah, so Perseverance Education is just my own LLC, and I just think, like, with that mission statement, at times a weakness of project-based learning, and I love project-based learning, but a weakness is that students focus on kind of the transfer, but not necessarily the surface level learning. And I think sometimes, like, we can get real excited when kids are doing like a real world project, and that's engaging and that's attractive. But we also have to remember that students need to have surface level knowledge and understanding as well. And so my mission statement is, like, I believe in authentic learning experiences, but I also believe in students having basic skills and basic knowledge so that they can properly answer that driving question, address that challenge. And so, I would say, like, I want the mission statement of Perseverance Education to reflect that. And really, Steve, that mission statement was inspired because I've been to some of the wall-to-wall project-based learning schools, and they're really good at transfer, but I would challenge them on surface and maybe even deep. And then I also, I would challenge my own school. I think we're good at surface and deep, but we're not always great at transfer and showing how content is connected to the real world. And so that mission statement is sort of the result of that idea that, we need to be able to have sort of an equal intensity of surface, deep, and transfer learning within each unit of study, that students should not only be provided authentic challenges and experiences, but they should be provided opportunities to learn the basic knowledge and facts that they need in order to address those authentic challenges.
That's excellent. I love it. By the way, I got to ask this question. Is it just coincidence that in the middle of Perseverance is Sever?
That was very intentional, Steve.
Cool.
And you're actually one of the few that's picked up on that. So it's very intuitive on your end, but that is very intentional.
Excellent. I love it. So nice. All right. I need a Veldering. Good stuff. So I got a question to ask you here. If you had a chance to be the closing speaker at a conference of classroom teachers who are getting ready to start the new school year, what would be something that you would want them to remember from your talk?
I think really two things. One, this sustainable project-based learning framework that I've written about, I hope that the audience sees it as kind of like a smoothie. And I want to give an example. I'm a father of two kids, and I'm always trying to get them to eat healthy. And instead of giving them strawberries, bananas, yogurt, maybe some kale on a plate, what I do is I throw those things in a blender and I make a smoothie, and they're more likely to eat that. I think in schools today, there are a lot of initiatives going on. We have literacy strategies, we have social and emotional learning. We're getting ready for our standardized tests. We have professional learning communities. We're working to meet the needs of all of our students, including students that have IEPs and 504s and ILPs, students that are multi-language learners. What I hope to do in this framework is make it like a smoothie, that we incorporate like John Hattie's high impact strategies. We incorporate teacher action research and a process for professional learning communities. We incorporate best practice in unit design and planning. We incorporate best practice in assessments, all in one package, all in one smoothie, if you will. And that's the way that I hope when people read the book, they see this as a comprehensive framework that really integrates a lot of these siloed initiatives that are currently taking place at our school. So that would be the first thing. And then the second thing is this, and this is kind of where we started. I believe that as a leader, I want to ask the right questions instead of having the right answer. And so whether you're doing project-based learning or not, or whether you're doing these things or not, I would leave the audience with 4 key questions to take back to their schools. Question number 1, how are we getting to know our students? What's motivating them? How are we building the relationships? Question number 2, what's the evidence of surface, deep, and transfer learning? Question number 3, how are we defining these employability skills or SEL skills or ideal graduate skills? How are we defining those for our kids? Skills like collaboration and self-awareness and social awareness. How are we defining those and being intentional about giving kids feedback in their growth in those skills? And question number 4 is Dr. John Hattie's question. We typically have our students for a year. How are we ensuring 1 year's growth in 1 year's time? I think it's those 4 questions that schools should be focused on today. And whether you're doing project-based learning or not, I think those 4 questions are the most important questions as educators we should be asking. And I think project-based learning is a great vehicle to be able to answer those 4 questions. It's not necessarily the only vehicle. I think it's a great vehicle. So those would be the 2 points that I would make.
Love it. Love it. Thank you so much. That would be so cool. Just a note, do you speak to, if someone listening to this goes, oh, Brad makes a good point. I'd like to have him talk about his book and his, those points that he just made, because that's right up our alley. How do they contact you? What other information, if they want to find out about engaging you to talk more, or your book, or how do they reach out and find out more?
Yeah, sure. So you could visit my website, which is perseveranceeducation.com. You could also go or type in sustainableprojectbasedlearning.com. That'll take you to my website as well. You can contact me via email, which is on the website. You can also book me through several different organizations I work for. Obviously, Solution Tree, my publishing company, an organization called the Core Collaborative, an organization, PBL Works too. I'm a national faculty member. If you like their stuff, you can go through that channel. So those are several ways. You can also find me on Twitter, and I'm just at Brad Sever.
Excellent. Well, I will have that information in my show notes, so it's easy for them to reach out and make connection with you. So good stuff. So before we go, Brad, I have 2 last questions that I like to ask my guests. And the first one goes like this. How do you keep going when so much is going on that you may want to quit?
Man, I guess my why is I just want to provide authentic learning experiences for kids. I just want teaching and learning to be authentic for kids. And I just really get motivated when I see the light bulbs go off and I see kids feel empowered if they feel like their work is meaning or their work that they're creating is going to benefit somebody else. I also am empowered when I see teachers get excited about teaching and learning. I just think I oftentimes thrive off of other people's excitement. So I guess that's how I keep going, and that's how I persevere during tough, difficult times.
Excellent. Love it. Last question. Do you have a teacher in your past who made a difference in your life? If so, who was it, and what would you say if given the chance to say thank you?
Oh, what a great question. Yeah, I guess first of all, both my parents were educators, so I guess first and foremost, them, and they were just the most amazing parents anyone could ask for. My grandfather was a teacher, my aunt was a teacher, so I come from a family of educators. But I still keep in touch with several of my all-time favorite teachers. One was my teacher and high school track coach. His name's Doug Drenth. And, fortunately, we do keep in touch, and I've had the opportunity to say thank you to him on numerous occasions. So, just so grateful for all of the amazing mentors and teachers that I've had in my life. So those are a few.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. And Brad, it was awesome talking with you today. Thanks so much for sharing your book, Sustainable Project-Based Learning, 5 Steps for Designing Authentic Classroom Experiences in Grades 5 through 12, and your venture, Perseverance Education. I mean, you have an awesome direction and purpose. I'm wishing you the best in all you do.
Steve, thank you so much. What a privilege and honor it was to be able to talk with you today and be part of this podcast. Thank you so much.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching Learning Leading K12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching Learning Leading K12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.